Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be discussing this book, Bloody Rose. This is a spoiler warning for the book Bloody Rose, by the way. There's going to be a lot of spoilers in it because the core of my rant is based around the plot and the way it interacts with the characters in the latter half of the book. So if you don't want to be spoiled on this, then maybe don't watch this video. There are aspects of this book that in a previous rant I alluded to myself not being a fan of, and I think this is the video where I think this is the time where I am ready to explain those thoughts. In other books, I've lamented the issue that comes up in fantasy from time to time where a inequality is noticed but that nothing is done about it. And I think Bloody Rose is one of those prime examples of that issue. And what I mean is that the setting, this book is an evolution of Kings of the Wild. At the end of Kings of the Wild, the mercenaries are fighting this giant horde, this horde that is there to destroy the first of the great nations of men, of humans. And that city is besieged, and the mercenaries break that siege. And in the epilogue, certain moments are discussed, how Golden Gabe ends up retiring for good, how Arcandius Moog has found the cure for a sickness, a rot that comes from the Heartwild, the great forest in this setting. And he himself was wasting away, but by being able to produce that cure, put himself in the record books for a great accomplishment. It also mentions how their tallest warrior, the one with the two-handed axe, goes back to his punishment, which he had committed a crime before the first book started, and now he feels like he needs to go back to. And then the king, who was effectively the stepfather to a lot of kids. His wife, the queen, who was royal by blood, had been sleeping with others for well over a decade, and all of his kids were actually her kids with other men. He finally got out of the toxic relationship he was in, and then was able to become the leader of the city that is no longer besieged. And taking the lesson from that moment in history, is able to form a land where the monsters are able to come out of hiding, where they can be respected and treated well by humans. That the slavery and the destruction of those monsters is no longer a thing there. Bloody Rose picks up where, instead of being like that earlier generation of mercenaries where they went into the wilderness to kill monsters, Bloody Rose is a group of highly successful mercenaries, monster killers, but their venue isn't the wilderness, but grand arenas like the Kings of the Wild fought in the first book. And in this is their everyday life. They tour from city to city and fight in gladiatorial arenas monsters that are captured by wranglers and brought to these cities, where they will be killed for entertainment in front of thousands of people. And I think Bloody Rose falls off as soon as they highlight that. The main character of Bloody Rose is not the titular character. The main character is a young girl named Tam, who has a crush on Bloody Rose because Bloody Rose is the greatest star of her generation. And Tam leaves home with her father's blessing, but with his blessing including a clause that she never return home. He doesn't want to see her ever again. But he does wish her well. And what comes from that is that Tam sees her heroes for who they really are. Alcoholics, violent, destructive, self-destructive, and in some ways hypocrites. The story largely follows Tam and her coming of age story as the bard of Bloody Rose's group. But it mostly follows the plot set forth by Rose. And that plot is that she is a mother, and she generally has her dad, Golden Gabe, take care of her daughter, his granddaughter. And her husband, who is not human and is one of the last of his kind, wants to settle down because he doesn't like the violence. He doesn't like touring in that way. But he goes along with her anyway. And Rose, the Bloody Rose, her goal is to finish this tour and then take on a mission that she was specifically recruited for, and then they will return home, they will be done, they will be retired. Meanwhile, another horde, smaller than the one from Kings of the Wild, but more desperate in tone, is coming, and this one is led by a giant, a towering figure, a real giant. The first part, I think, that I don't like about Bloody Rose is carrying the mood forward, and this is only a couple years change in time. Most of humanity isn't comfortable with monsters, and the agent, the handler for Bloody Rose, is a satyr, and he wears a large, wide-brimmed hat that covers up his goat horns on his head. And he has to keep that on at all times and wear these large boots, these ostentatious boots and pants, so that all people can really see is his human-looking upper body and face. They just see him as a hairy guy. And he has to blend in with humans. And that's not... It's called out pretty early on that he has to blend in with people, that some of the groupies know his secret, but for the most part, he has to pretend to be human to live. And there's a discussion about, well, aren't you a non-human monster like the rest of them? And he tries to rationalize it. He tries to justify his involvement. Well, not all monsters are monstrous, but the ones we fight are, which is very obviously wrong-minded. Especially since in Kings of the Wild and in Bloody Rose, we see how Wranglers have gone out. They're not bringing back warriors or prisoners of war. They're bringing back prisoners, but like all ages, all sexes. They're bringing back whatever monsters they can find. They're not fighting great murderers. They're fighting people trying to hide away from the real monsters, the humans that are hunting them down even when they are trying to avoid those humans. So there's that justification that is incredibly weak. And then There's a moment near the middle part of the book. Bloody Rose is incredibly self destructive and wanted to be someone on her own. And her nickname, Bloody Rose, is one she earned from killing a Cyclops. But she, in the years since Kings of the Wild, has had to deal with the reality that the world's greatest epic is about her being in trouble and her dad coming to save her. And there's a moment, like I said, in the middle of the book. This book is about a bit more than 500 pages long, and this happens around the 330 mark. How could I forget? Rose's own anger flared like wind-blown embers. Half the songs in the world paint me as a useless twit, waiting in Castia for her gallant father to come rescue her. Is that what this was about? Gabe asked, on the edge of his seat now. Is that why you dragged your friends to the Brumal Wastes? Why you put their lives at risk so you could get your name in a song? And then there's a part where the rest of the band says we went willingly, effectively. And why did you start a band, Dad? Rose's smile was cool as a cadaver's feet. Did you have some noble purpose in mind? Or were you just trying to fuck every farmer's daughter in Grandjewel? Moog snorted at that, but quickly masked his mirth behind a thoughtful frown. Gabe didn't even blink. I started a band because the Centaur clans were stealing children who strayed too close to the forest. Because ghoul spiders sucked the blood from our horses and left them hanging dead from the trees. Because when I was 16 years old, a wyvern swooped out of the night and flew off with a farmer's daughter I was madly in love with, while I cowered in the grass like a mouse. Gabriel straightened in his seat. It took Clay and me 2 weeks to track that fucker down. But we did, and we killed it, and I can't say for sure if the bones I buried belonged to the girl I was looking for, but I wept over them just the same. Lightning arced across the roofing sail, scoring Gabe's ire with a sizzling crack. Things were different back then, he went on. The world was a dangerous place. The roads weren't safe. Monsters were everywhere, and if you heard something go bump in the night, it probably meant that something was coming to kill you. But when was the last time a giant stormed through a city, or a slag drake turned a whole forest to ash, or the trees themselves came marching from the Heartwild? Even the rot is nothing more than a nuisance nowadays, thanks to Moog. The wizard wore a sheepish smile. He started, but Gabriel went on raving. Yeah, we got famous along the way, and yeah, we enjoyed the hell out of it, but we didn't crave it. We got rich, too. Not by selling seats or splitting the overhead with some miserly wrangler. And you know what? You're right. I did fuck a lot of farmers' daughters. But at some point, things changed. We're not afraid to walk in the woods, or swim in a lake, or take shelter in a cave only to find out it's a dragon's lair. We toppled the giants, brought the ogres to their knees, burned the trolls, and scattered their ashes to the wind. And now? Now we're hunting down fairy tales, apparently. We are the ones going bump in the night, Freecloud murmured. Freecloud being Bloody Rose's non-human husband. There's this moment right there. We are the ones that go bump in the night. The world isn't as dangerous as it was 35 years before, and Golden Gabe helped shape it to be that way. And Bloody Rose is out there fighting monsters because of a chip on her shoulder. And I like that in a character. She's flawed in a really good way. And her story, as it progresses in the final chapters, brings that to a nice close. But that line stuck with me really hard. We are the ones going bump in the night. The cloud through which they passed seeped into Tam's skin and chilled her blood. She'd spent most of her life tormented by what monsters had done to her family. How many nights had she woken up screaming, sweating, sobbing for fear of some dread creature knocking down her door? It hadn't occurred to her that the dread creatures of the world might be doing the same. She thought of the Sinu murdered by Hawkshaw at the temple in Dire March, and the orcs Fable had slaughtered back in Hypool. She remembered them scrambling to escape the wrath of Rose and her bandmates, clawing at the stone walls, desperately trying to protect the weakest among them. She recalled the anguished wail of the Cyclops set loose in the ravine. Its flesh had been scarred by years of abuse, its spirit tortured by captivity into something hopelessly wicked. And there's this moment where all of this is coming to a head. Everyone is focusing on that. But then it has to get back to the rest of the plot. Tam peered around the skyship's deck, seeing the same dawning awareness in the eyes of her companions. They'd have considered all this before, but she was certain. But to hear it from the mouth of Golden Gabe, the most revered mercenary in all 5 courts, would lodge the truth of it like a dagger in their hearts. Roderick, hatless and horned, stared morosely into his lap. "I wish you hadn't gone west," Gabriel told his daughter. "I wish, sometimes, that we hadn't saved Castia from the Heartwild Horde. We might have avoided this war altogether." Rose said nothing. Her expression was a mask of cool restraint, but her eyes betrayed a hurt that Tam suspected her father alone was capable of inflicting. In a roundabout way, Gabriel was blaming her for the return of the Winter Queen and the emergence of the Brumal Horde, burdening Rose with the death of everyone who had lost their lives at Castia, and Cragmore, and Coldfire Pass. "We might have reasoned with Lastleaf," Gabriel said, helping himself to a share of the blame. "But instead we routed his army, shattered his dream of a new dominion. We left him no choice but vengeance, and now..." He left the rest unspoken, but the implication was clear to all. The Winter Queen is a necromancer, and as it's revealed in the latter half of the story, and this is where I think the book loses the plot, there's this horde, the Brumal Horde, and they know that the mercenaries gathered to fight that horde lost. They know that a lot of monsters lost their lives as well. But the necromancer, the Winter Queen, her point gathering the horde wasn't to have the horde end the world, but it relates to a plot point from the first book that she died and then was brought back somehow by her husband. And then every time she died after that, her husband sacrificed another of their species just to bring her back. And she crossed the threshold between death and life so many times, she lost all hope for the world. And in becoming a necromancer, she uses her powers to bring down the whole world. At the end of Kings of the Wild, her son kills himself with a sword that is designed to bring her back. That she was dead, and that her son was the sacrifice, chose to sacrifice himself so that she could come back. And once she did, she didn't care about the monsters. She didn't care about humans. She just wanted everything to die. And so the Brumal Horde that she gathers is just cannon fodder. And she raises all of the dead and starts marching these undead armies to wipe off human city after human city, monster tribe after monster tribe. No one is safe from these undead world-ending threats. And so that self-realization, we are the ones that go bump in the night, has to take a back seat to there's this world-ending undead threat, and we have to stop it. And then they finally get to like the capital of the modern adventuring mercenary monster slaying system, and they are surrounded on all sides by these undead, and they realize they don't have enough to defend the city, that they're going to lose. And then they turn to the enslaved monsters and say, truthfully, you are going to die some way, whether the undead horde kills you or whether we mercenaries kill you in the ring. You're going to die. Or you can go out on your own terms and hope that some of these that don't fight can live and be free after the war. They turn to the enslaved and make soldiers out of them. They make an army out of the enslaved. It's either death on your own terms or death on the undead's terms. They shift the ones that go bump in the night from the mercenaries, the monster slaying mercenaries, to the world ending undead. And none of the epilogue handles this, and none of the narrative after that realization handles the fact that they are the ones that go bump in the night. And that is why I don't like Bloody Rose, is that it's a good narrative. Eames is great at weaving emotion into dialogue, and there's a great moment where Tam's story, her coming of age, wraps up, and this is a big part of the spoilers. When Golden Gabe dies, she, as a member of the Bloody Rose and as the bard, is expected to bear witness, but she doesn't feel like she's part of this community yet. This community of the greatest heroes of the previous and current generation. But she is expected to go into Slowhand Cooper's house. The door is held open for Tam so that she can bear witness. Go on, Bran urged. I'll wait here. When she didn't move, her uncle nudged her with an elbow. You're their bard, Tam. Whatever happens inside, you should be there. He was right, of course. A bard's duty was to watch, to witness. For Tam to turn an eye when glory faded, when heroes were forced to endure heartbreak and hardship no strength of arms could overcome, was to betray that duty. Tam stepped through the door. She never sang about what happened beyond that threshold, nor spoke of it to anyone who wasn't present themselves. What was obvious, though, to those who knew her before and after that morning, was that the woman who emerged was distinctly changed from the girl who entered. Her smiles were shorter, her laugh was louder. She became distracted at times, and would stare at nothing with a look of shattered sorrow that passed like a cloud the moment someone spoke her name. She loved less quickly, but more fiercely, and made certain that those she cared for knew it well. Sometimes she wept when it snowed. So, Eames has the potential to weave the narrative in such emotionally heartbreaking ways to guide you to these realizations. We are the ones that go bump in the night. But what separates this book from others like it, and one I'll mention in just a second, is that they don't cross that threshold. As an author, he is leading us to water and then refuses to let any of the horses drink, to, stretch a metaphor. This is a very capitalist fantasy kind of book, that everything in this fantasy is very Watsy-fied in a way, that everything in this fantasy is very modern tabletop RPG. It's a lot like Orconomics. It wants to focus on an aspect of capitalism and of high fantasy settings. It also shows the evils within certain systems. In this case, the way that entertainment matters more to people than the lives of monsters who are only different from humans because they are a different species. That this entertainment system takes priority over that is very similar to the way that the venture capital and insurance scam system of Orconomics calls attention to that kind of evil. But in the climax of Orconomics, the first book, as soon as the party realizes that what they did was give an item of perceived value to someone that was a perceived enemy or adversary, they spend the rest of the first book of the Orconomics, the Dark Prophet Saga, and all of the second book trying to avenge the orcs that died, that they fucked up, but they are going to do everything in their power to change who has power in their system. That the dwarves were impoverished and stubbornly holding on to their strongholds, but were a joke to the rest of the intelligent, good races. And then the dwarves sponsor the orcs, who then turn to save the kingdom in the second book of the Dark Prophet saga. I still haven't read the third. I'll get around to it. But as soon as the main characters, the main group of friends and party members in Orconomics realize that they are the ones that go bump in the night, and they just fed the orcs on a silver platter to the mercenaries in their setting, they fight the system as hard as they can. That realization happens in Bloody Rose, but that evil, that system has to take a back seat to the undead threat and to the titular character Bloody Rose's character growth. That is the difference between a amazing book and a good book. Like, Bloody Rose is a good book, and it's fun to read, and it's emotional, but it's on a different tier from others in that kind of genre. It doesn't fulfill its duty to the reader the way that Orconomics does. That as soon as the mystery is solved in Orconomics, the main characters act upon it, and they act upon it with everything they have. Whereas in Bloody Rose, there's very few survivors by the end of the story, and they don't have that energy to fix the system, to work towards a better, more egalitarian, more accepting society. All of that is just pushed to the wayside. And I've heard, allegedly, that Bloody Rose is going to get a sequel, that it probably is going to focus on like 90s pop or 90s rock, the music of the 90s, in the same way that Kings of the Wild did a pastiche of the 70s and Bloody Rose of the 80s. As a reader, I'm thinking they're the ones that go bump in the night before the characters realize it. But once the characters realize it, that should be a focus. That should be a primary focus that they care about. It shouldn't be left to a third book to handle that. It should be something these characters care about because they're supposed to be heroes. And it doesn't. And that's what frustrates me about Bloody Rose, is that Nicholas Eames wrote a good story, but the setting has to take a back seat to the plot. And I don't think it does it well. I like this book, though. I paid $20 for it. I would gladly pay $20 for it again. This, like Kings of the Wild, like Orconomics, I read the second half of the book from time to time. Just pick it up and read that, because it's a good and fun book to read. But it doesn't deliver on all the promises I feel it should. Like, I feel like it made. So, if you like high fantasy, a romp of an adventure, a coming-of-age story with dozens of references to 70s and 80s rock, Bloody Rose is going to be a good book for you. Yeah. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.